Thank you, everybody, for joining us on another episode of DNS Unfiltered. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Katie Paxton Fear. Katie, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. I have been following your work in like AI and machine learning and natural language processing, and you have opinions, which I like. So I kind of wanted to get into those opinions today. But let's just start with Um, a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get into all of this cybersecurity and now like AI research and things like that?
In a word, accidentally. I never really intended to get into cybersecurity. When I was at university, I was really into AI. And I finished university. I went and got a proper adult job as a developer at a company. I did a little bit of developing. I did a little bit of kind of like tech support, and I did a little bit of data science as well. Um, Basically, my job was to tell the very scary people who owned the company that their sales figures were going to look bad because we were running out of data. That was like fundamentally my job, and I was paid well. Like I was paid well for my experience level, and I had like a little flat. And I was walking to lunch one day, and I realized I really hated my job. It wasn't because the work wasn't like challenging. It wasn't because I wasn't getting paid enough. I was very fairly compensated. Um, I just had zero fulfillment from that job. It turns out telling very scary people that they're going to run out of sales data is not a very interesting job to have. Unfortunately, I had this realization in December, like it was like maybe November, December time. Um, and and I decided I'm going to do a PhD, except for all the PhDs had closed because PhDs start in like August, September. So I was way too late. But I hated my job enough that I'm like, I cannot do this job for another year. So I just went with the only PhD that was still open, which was in cybersecurity. Um,
Really?
and that is how I got into cybersecurity. I never really intended, and for the first year of my PhD, I really saw cybersecurity as not my interest, but like the domain in which I worked. It wasn't until I got invited to a HackerOne live hacking event through some friends of mine, and I actually had a go at doing hacking myself, that I was like, oh no, actually, I like this. I like this a lot. And then I went and finished my PhD, worked at a bunch of different companies, also worked as a lecturer at university, teaching other people how to do what I do. Of course, also YouTube as well, teaching people. I'm very much an educator and an academic at heart.
Well, what was the thing that you did at that hacking conference that you were like, oh, this is really cool?
So I have to preface this by saying I knew absolutely nothing about hacking. I had never looked at Burt before. I'd never even seen like a request in its raw form. I had only done development before. So I'd made websites, I'd made apps before. So I had that experience, but I didn't know anything about security. I was very much one of those developers who was kind of like, security is somebody else's problem. It's not my problem. I'm a developer. I'm not a security person. So it doesn't matter. My code is fine. And I was looking at Uber, and despite the fact I had no idea what I was doing, I noticed something that was a bit strange in the way it was behaving. And I was like, if I was making that application, this is how I do that incorrectly. And lo and behold, I tried here's what I would do wrong if I was building this application, and it worked. And I found my first vulnerability on Uber despite not really knowing what I was doing. And then I was also rewarded with my first bug bounty as well. So I got $1,000 for that. And I remember the HackerOne person coming over to me and being like, because I was a mentee, right? We were basically just like learning web security as part of this community event. And there was a bunch of us there. And nobody was really like they're doing that hacking that seriously. A lot of folks were just there to kind of have the experience and to learn a little bit, but not necessarily to find a vulnerability. I remember the HackerOne guy coming up to me and going, Katie, you're getting a bounty. And I was like, no, you are lying to me. He was like, no, you'll get it's $1,000. I'm like, Jesus Christ, what? I'm getting $1,000? What do you mean I'm getting $1,000?
But when you said $1,000, I was thinking Uber, only $1,000. Come on. Open up
Well,
that pocketbook a little bigger.
to be fair to Uber, it was a very minor vulnerability. It
Okay.
was not like a super impactful thing. Because again, I didn't really know what I was doing, so I didn't even know that I'd necessarily found a vulnerability until like it was kind of like right in my face that hey, this is actually like a vulnerability. It's got a name.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that was my first experience hacking, and then I never looked back after that. I really enjoyed the kind of problem solving element of it, the kind of digging into how other developers would have written something incorrectly. I really liked that. I liked the kind of puzzle piecing of it. It was for me a really fun like investigation into how software is built, and that just scratched the right itch in my brain.
So this is a great story, by the way. You're like accidentally a cybersecurity PhD, accidentally find a vulnerability for Uber, and then you're like, this is kind of fun. And they just gave me $1,000. Let's keep
Yeah,
going.
exactly. I
So you
I think really with a lot of my career, and I'm always somebody who just takes opportunities that come to me, right? Like I try and never say no to an opportunity because you just have no idea. And if my career has taught me anything, it's that the weirdest things will end up like making your career.
So when you were doing this Uber investigation, were you looking at their like API response in the browser? Is that how it was working? Because I've heard you talk a lot about API hacking, and I've looked at this myself like not too long ago, a few weeks ago. We were trying to get a video for DNS filter that we presented at Black Hat this past
Mm.
year, and it's like if you put your password in and you go to the website, you can see it. I'm like, well, if you can see it, you can get it. I used the network tab and developer tools to find the M3U and downloaded all the chunks and transcribed into MP4. I'm like, uh, this is not hard. And I'm curious, like Black Hat in this case, were they super, super security focused when they were doing that? Probably not. They're probably just like, yeah, whatever. I'm behind a password is fine. But you talk a lot about API hacking. What are some of the more detrimental effects of if your API is incorrectly coded?
I think when it comes to APIs, a lot of people think that they're something special. Like a lot of people will come up to me and say, "I'll make more videos about API security." I'm like, "Why? I've already made I've already given talks about this. There's nothing new to talk about here." Terrible thing to admit when you're like half your job is going to conferences and telling people about this sort of stuff. But I think people make the kind of core mistake of thinking that APIs are different and APIs are special. And simply the kind of fine tooth comb that regular applications get, APIs just don't. Like they are usually kind of security by obscurity. They're kind of seen as like last kind of the last applications to be secure. I work at a company called SemGraph and we make a SAST product. So you can basically like find vulnerabilities in your code. It's free. You can like not no sales here. But as part of that, we were talking about making some nice articles about security and different vulnerabilities and why they matter. I said to one of my colleagues, "Oh, we should do stuff about API security." He's like, "Why? We're not an API security company." I was like, "What? Does the product not work if you've got like a RESTful reference in the code or something? Like it's just an application. Like it's the same as." And I think that's the mistake people make. People forget that they are just regular applications, and they kind of just ignore it and like turn on their blinders and just decide that's it. And quite a lot of the time, the vulnerabilities that I found in APIs, none of them are that technical. I am not I have a PhD. I am not a super technical person. I know a ton about natural language processing, but I'm not somebody who can dive into like the forensics, like file forensics or going in and doing malware analysis, right? I don't have that experience. What I find are silly little mistakes. They're the kind of the difference between maybe one line of code. Like there's an if statement missing here. And from that, you might assume, okay, those vulnerabilities are kind of going to be quite, dull, boring. And they are. That's absolutely true. But they can have really big impacts because it's about the context in which that API works. I found API security vulnerabilities at APIs that power airports. And I was able to change the runway length of an airport And that's when you start to go, okay, right, so why could you do that? Well, they didn't have an if statement checking if you had a genuine account, and that was it. That was the. But explaining it technical is boring. But saying I could have crashed an aeroplane, that sounds way more impressive. And if my job is anything, it's making myself sound more impressive than I actually am. So in terms of what mistakes people are making, I think people just forget about the API. They pretend it doesn't exist. They pretend that it's not important, and then hope for the best.
Yeah, I think people have a large problem with collecting too much data and then sending that through to the API via the API just in case it's necessary, like users' information like emails and phone numbers. And I can see how that could go awry. I've even seen hacking where people will use like very common databases like cars.com to find a license plate and then use a different website to punch in that license plate and get the person's home address and things like that. So like these APIs, let's just say bad API etiquette combined with other bad API etiquette is pretty dangerous in certain circumstances.
Yeah, and I think especially nowadays, APIs connect us so much more than ever before. Like nowadays, every single time you take your phone off of unlock, right, you are being sent thousands of API requests, and no longer is the attack surface just the application you're looking at. You've also got every other application that it's interacting with and how it's interacted with it. And the API attack surface, especially now with AI as well, when we connect an AI agent to, like, I recently connected my AI agent to my to-do list and my email application. I've granted that permission to then see my to-do list and my email application, right? I've connected those together in a way they weren't connected before. And that can be a really serious security risk because you don't know if idiots like me are going to put sensitive data into these apps. So I think even more so now, API security is becoming kind of more in the forefront. And it was only recently at API Days London, their whole conference was called There's No AI Without APIs. And that is 100% true. And it's even more important now than it ever has been.
So let's talk about the next, or first, I want you to educate me on what is an MCP server, and then talk about how that is kind of like an in between for APIs, if I have that correct.
So MCP is Modex Model Context Protocol, and I'm going to be honest, it's what the AI bros have renamed APIs to. It's fundamentally just an
Hmm.
API. They hate me saying that though. Like they're like, it's not an API. It's a USB-C cable. It's like it's not USB-C. It's an API, guys. Come on, it runs on a web server, man. And essentially, what it does is, while typical APIs like RESTful or GraphQL have really strict standards about like how they work and how they're supposed to work and how you're supposed to interact with them, MCPs are APIs that are a little bit more flexible. So instead of having lists of endpoints, instead you have lists of tools. And these tools essentially expose a part of whatever application is running the MCP server. So if you've got an MPC server that connects to your to-do list, you might have a tool that says, grab all the items in my to-do list, add a deadline to one of these to-dos, add add a new category, organize these by task type, whatever. Like it's gonna be like that. It's gonna be very, very basic functions.
So
All
is it a way to
MCP.
use, sorry, is it a way to use like natural language to interface with an API then? Does that sound about right?
Not quite.
Asking for a friend.
So the way it practically works is that you tell Claude that an MCP server exists, and then it will get the context from the MCP server about what it can do. And then it will decide which tools to call in which situations. You can kind of imagine, for you as a workflow, you would use your general AI agent that you use for basically anything. You go up to it and be like, hey, what do I have to do tomorrow? Or when's the deadline for this thing? It would then make those calls to the MCP server that would then the MCP server would return it and the AI agent can return it. So it's not so much that the MCP works with natural language, because it doesn't. It actually just works with function names, essentially. But it provides this interface for connecting up AI agents with, or AI assistants as well, with traditional applications. And MCP servers can exist for applications, it can exist for the file system, it can exist for typical APIs as well. All of that can be wrapped up together. It's basically a very flexible API.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can see how powerful it is. I've never had the opportunity to use any yet, except for like just testing around with like extensions and VS Code and things like that. But it sounds like we're MCP is really like a different application that is like a translation layer of
Yeah,
sorts.
just like an API is.
Yeah.
So really, all we've done is we've just renamed APIs to MCP and we've rebranded it. I mean, mission successful. You know, if I'm saying the reason why APIs are so insecure is that people keep on thinking they're these new unique things, we've done it again with MCP. We've successfully conned people into thinking these aren't just regular applications, but
Well,
they are, and they're vulnerable to all the same vulnerability.
so let's talk about that vulnerability. So you see MCP servers come out for like all kinds of stuff. And there's like marketplaces where you can grab one for like Supabase or Twitter or whatever. And you don't often know who made this thing. Sometimes it's by the official developer of that app. Usually it's not, from what I've seen. What are the risks in this MCP server land? That's really just an API with by a different name.
Yeah, especially nowadays when it comes to MCPs, we're still seeing a lot of them being very bootstrapped, in the sense that it's like people who use an application are building MCP servers based on existing infrastructure. So sometimes that can be like a regular API or an API like we're used to. And sometimes that could be through kind of more creative means. So, for example, I run an MCP server that connects to my to-do list. My to-do list has no API. What it does have is URL schemes. So you can use
Mm.
URL schemes to interact with the application. And so the MCP layer is taking like the turning it into an API essentially from URL schemes. Now, what this like practically ends up being is that the developers of applications do not write the MCP servers, as you said, right? Like it is very much written by the community, by developers who are trying to implement these, and you can't trust them. And in fact, earlier this week, I think last weekend, it was reported that the first malicious MCP server in the wild was discovered from something called Postmark. And this the vulnerability, the malware in it, essentially it's an email sending application that developers can use to send things like password reset emails or newsletters or reminders or whatever. It BCC'd in the attacker's email address. Very, very small malware, right? Like compared to some of the other malware we've seen this month. Sorry, NPM, but
Yeah, right. Sorry. Sorry, chalk.
it it's it's very minor in comparison. But in terms of like the practical use cases, if you like, of it, you know, you've got people who are trusting random developers who are just downloading these applications, granting it full access to things like their email and just hoping for the best. And that's kind of it. So there's a lot of concerns around malicious MCP. More so than that, MCP registries are often read by AI agents and by AI assistants. So you have this other layer on top of this, which is that you can convince an AI agent to use your malicious AI MCP server in order to extract data. And it's just this really interesting attack surface now of like social engineering and trust that's being built up with AI.
It's like turtles all the way down, which is what APIs were to begin with. Let's
Exactly.
see.
Everything is APIs.
I'm looking up. So they actually have a they have the domain listed publicly on what it was, and for that specific attack, which was a postmark server, which is like a mass email sending tool for like uh, transactional style emails. So that's actually listed on NPM, which anybody can publish on. We've seen some NPM supply chain attacks already. And this, while not necessarily a supply chain attack, is just kind of riding alongside the coattails of other abuses of the NPM system, which
It's a
is
bad
really
month for
scary.
NPM.
The second bad look in a week.
For poor GitHub who's having to deal with this.
So the domain that is listed that was used as the malware is actually listed by us, DNS Filter, as malware. So I'm curious, what type of security can you have in place to protect yourself from using MCP servers and random NPM packages, or can you just not do it? Like, what do you do?
Honestly, you kind of can't do it. So the way I'm doing it, at least at the moment, is I read the code. I mean, MCP servers are not that technically complex, and I have a background as a developer, so I can just read the code and just double check that the email MCP server that I'm using isn't VCCing all my emails to some random domain. But honestly, there's no really good approaches. I mean, there's certainly folks like yourselves who are recognizing, IOCs and flagging them and kind of can do that. But then, honestly, for the most part, not every piece of malware is ever going to be detected. There are some really good folks in the supply chain space who are trying to find the majority of them. But actually, it's really hard. And if there isn't very clear indicators, you kind of can't know. And particularly when it comes to MCP, because it is so new and there are so many vendors that just don't have MCP servers yet, but developers want to be able to use them with MCP because they have got these like AI enabled workflows, they are more likely to just download random people's code. And I think really the solution here is for potentially a lot of products to just create their own MCP servers, like make that available and do it without the malware. And I think that would probably help a lot.
Do you
Long
think that?
term with,
No,
sorry,
go ahead. No, you go ahead. Long term, let's hear it.
long term with MCP servers, like there are other security vulnerabilities that can occur, primarily around access control rights, which to anybody who knows anything about API security will not be a surprise because access control has always been something in APIs that has been a problem. Now, long term, we are going to have to address those issues. But short term, I think if more organizations just embrace an MCP, they can take the advantages of it without the kind of like malware being sneakily installed.
Yeah, and this is true for lots of marketplaces like Docker Hub. I use a lot of Docker containers. And so I will always go look for the official Docker container. And if I have to make adjustments, I'll, work up a customized version of the Docker file and build it myself, but from their source. But there's another one that's out there that's exactly what I want, but I don't know who that person is or group is or whatever. And it's kind of scary, but I'm curious, do you feel that NPM in this case, which is a package maintainer for JavaScript libraries, for those listening, do you think any of the onus is upon NPM to do some kind of scanning, vulnerability scanning against the code hosted on their platform? Same thing with GitHub.
So I think it's a really difficult thing. I do not have opinions on this, and I will explain why. I am not an open source contributor. I have never contributed to a fully open source project more than my own that I've released. I don't think it's my place, even as somebody who is in the security community, to tell NPM how it's done, because quite frankly, the maintainers who do maintain these are getting zero financial support. Like the fact that a single person's account led to the kind of scales of compromises that we saw a few weeks ago, yeah, is bad. But every company that uses that, if they literally donated maybe like $10, they probably could afford to have security scanning. They probably could afford to pay a security person on staff, right? They wouldn't be relying on the goodness of the community. And I don't think it's our place to tell them that because, and this is my controversial opinion, that if companies are going to complain that open source is secure, I better see your contributions to open source. I better see your open source projects that you run and your contributions to big open source projects as well. Like I want to see Linux kernel contributions in your commit history if you're going to tell me that open source is insecure. And most companies don't, right? They take from the open source community and they never give back. And so, can we ever be really that surprised that people who are doing this for free don't have the same security resources as massive companies? Wow, shock, horror. Maybe we
I
should give them some
completely,
money.
I completely agree with this sentiment. The entire web works off the backs of community effort for free. Like think of all the things in the Amazon marketplace that are named something crazy, but are really just MongoDB under the hood or Redis or whatever. So yeah, I feel that, and I think without having an opinion, just the opinion that we should not expect anything else if we don't openly support the efforts of prominent open source projects. So yeah.
And honestly, if you think about it, considering how open source works, actually, it's very impressive how well it works, right? Like the fact that we have like a security disclosures and CVEs, and people can get reports about CVEs, and then people can find out when their stuff has been fixed. Like the fact that we have got that on the backs of literally like no money is impressive on itself. But I really do think that organizations who are worried about supply chain attacks, one of the best things you can do is stop giving money to whatever vendor you're paying and give money to the open source projects that you are using, even if it's a small amount. Because I tell you what, if every company did that, they'd be able to pay for the security software themselves.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So, like the NPM supply chain attack that we saw in the recent few weeks, the maintainer of that project, one of them, that the one that got hacked, essentially, his GitHub account got compromised, and someone injected malicious code into a software package that was downloaded, I don't know how many times on npm, just because people have auto update scripts, and that happened. But within a few minutes or hours, that person was broadcasting that they had been hacked. This is what they've done to mitigate. They removed access for that user. They cleaned the code up, and you almost never see that from a closed source company when something of theirs gets breached. It's like a cloak and daggers and corporate speak out into the public, where it's like, what exactly happened? Like no one knows what happened. But within a few hours, we knew what happened with that specific attack because of it was, because I assume because it was open source.
And because like from that, I actually think that especially the crypto one, the one that everyone said the attacker fumbled, um, I think that the open source community deserves a lot of kudos for that, because I think it was noticed within an hour. People were talking about it. The packages had been pulled from npm within 2 to 3 hours. And actually, the blast radius was really limited because the open source community kind of immediately sprung into action and did it. Like, is it bad to fall for a phishing email? Yeah, of course, right? Like, we would hope that technical people wouldn't fall for phishing emails. But actually, I think the system around open source, the idea that this is something that anyone can contribute to, means that also anyone can provide the fix as well. So I think there's a lot to kind of show for how open source can be in making sure that stuff gets fixed quickly, and also noticed as well. You wouldn't have noticed this if it was the same malware that was attached to a company's software, right? So I do think that open source kind of worked for a lot of these. Now, whether or not the repository system that currently exists is like long-term viable for security, that's where I kind of pass the buck over to the actual people in the open source community, because I think they're the ones that are best placed to really understand the impact that this can have.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. So with that uh, hack, that vulnerability that was discovered, there was like very open disclosure. There was very open remediation, all because it was open source and it was quickly resolved. So that's actually a really interesting concept that maybe more closed source companies can take notes from.
I think as well, a lot of a lot of companies make the mistake of thinking that if we ever say that we've had a security vulnerability or a breach, automatically we are like, maybe we're adopting legal liability or we're going to be terrible PR. When companies like admit they've got a vulnerability and then work to resolve it, for me as a customer, that actually makes me feel more secure, not less. Like, I don't
Yeah.
look at that as being like, this is a fundamental failure in what this company did. I look at it being like, wow, I can see why their process has failed, and I can see them taking steps to resolve that. So I really do think that people are a bit too people are very, very worried about talking about security issues, but everybody has security issues. Doesn't matter if you're a massive company with thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue, or if you're a small business that hires two people, right? Like, you will always have security threats. It's how you approach that threat that determines how good your security is, not that it exists in the first place.
Yeah, I think this points to a larger issue. Like if we see a breach or something from a company, we usually hear about it in the news cycle, not from the developers or the company first. They only come in afterwards to clean up what has been exposed. But um, I think it points to a more rampant problem is that breaches, security vulnerabilities are just common. They're just so common. Like you found that, slight vulnerability in Uber's API when you were, self-described less experienced, and you shouldn't have found that. You shouldn't have been able to find that, but you did just by digging a little bit, being curious. I'm
And
just,
Uber
I'm
spends a
just,
lot of money on security as well, right? Like, it's not that Uber didn't care about security. They did. It's just they slipped through the cracks because stuff always falls through the cracks, right? It's
right.
just, we can't fix everything.
And I think that's the nature of software in the world we live in. It's like we can't fix everything. We're not going to fix everything. So the best we can do like rapid remediation? Is that like the best we can hope for?
I think in some cases, yeah. I mean, rapid remediation and limiting the blast radius. One thing I think is really interesting is if you look at when different regulations have come into different regions, like how it changes their approach to security. If you look at GDPR, one of the things you have to do in GDPR is if your customers are a victim of a data breach, you have to inform them without undue delay. So you cannot delay that. Like, you have to tell somebody when they've been breached through your company. And we've seen from that a lot of organizations shift to telling you if there's been a breach, right? We hear a lot more about data breaches. Are they more common, or do they just have to tell us about them now?
Mm.
So I think regulation helps a lot there in kind of doing it. But saying that, um, a lot of the way you understand your own personal security is things like notifications of breaches, right? That's you understanding your attack surface. You're not a company, you're an individual, but you still kind of need to know that information.
Yeah, I think that points to like generational knowledge of just the things that are out there. But I did want to go back to um, your teaching and talk about your students and what you are thinking about to get across to them to make them, great defenders and attackers and curiosity. Like, what is your mission there in your teaching?
So, with teaching, I think the way we do education has changed a lot from particularly when I was a student, and I'm not even that old. That is to say, a lot of students nowadays watch a lot of YouTube videos, right? They're engaging with the subject outside. They're watching us. They were watching us for some reason.
Hi.
Lord knows why. Um, but there is an additional requirement now for lectures to be not just useful and be topical, but also be entertaining. So quite a lot of my teaching is, how do I make this fun? How do I make this engaging for students? How do I give them a good experience? And you'd be surprised how few people and few of my colleagues in like teaching don't think about that. They're like, the students are paying to be here, they're going to listen to me waffle for an hour, that's it, I'm doing nothing more. But when I think about some of my best students, and there are some students who don't want to engage really, who are there because maybe they've been like told to go to university and they haven't really got a genuine interest or passion. My role for them is always to find that one bit of security that interests them, and to give them the space to figure out what that is, whether or not that's more on the hacking side or the defending side or the forensic side. My job is really to be a guide for them into finding what they're passionate about and what they're interested in, and find that bit of security. So I get a lot of flack from my colleagues because I kind of make my life quite difficult, especially when it comes to marking work. But for things like my assignments, I give them a lot of freedom. So for last year, my ethical hacking students had to make a TikTok video about any vulnerability they'd learned about in the class. It could not be longer than 3 minutes. I was deducting marks if it was longer than 3 minutes. But most of my colleagues looked at me like I was insane for suggesting that. And when the year previously, I had let them do whatever format they wanted. They just had to make something about a vulnerability. I gave them complete freedom to choose. My colleagues are just like, why are you doing that to yourself? That's an amazing amount of work for you to do. But I see a lot of value there in, one, pulling together like a portfolio for students about cybersecurity, but two, in helping them find that little nugget of what they're interested in and what is going to propel them through it. Because as somebody who's done 2 degrees, I tell you, you get done with your degree a long time before your degree is done with you. Like, mentally, the last few months of a degree are a slog. Like, it doesn't matter how much passion you have, it is a slog. And if you've got the little nugget that you know that interests you, that can keep you going. But if you don't have it, it becomes truly a battle of wills.
And these are like university, college age students, right?
Yeah, I tried to set it up so the students would hack me, and then they'd have to hack their own grade. But the university turned that down. But
You're
I
like,
really
okay,
did want them to
fine.
hack their grades.
You're like, they might find something useful that we can fix.
Right? And I was like, well, if you think about what the point of a course in ethical hacking is, it is to discover vulnerabilities. Arguably, a student has met the requirements if they hack my website on how I mark my students, if they're able to hack it. So they have met the learning objective. So I think it's a good example of where you could. I did also consider having it as like an extra credit. Like, if you did hack your grade, I'd keep your hacked grade, assuming it wasn't insane. But
So,
yeah.
so when the year you gave your students like complete freedom, like do whatever you want about one of the vulnerabilities that piqued your interest, what were some of the common submissions?
Oh man, a lot of students submitted academic reports. I
Oh,
Every single time
boring.
I opened something to like a regular essay, I was like, oh come on, you should have done something fun at least.
So then
But
the
I got some great ones. So I got one person had made like an intentionally vulnerable website that they'd put online to demonstrate one of the vulnerabilities, and it was kind of like a tutorial mixed in with a lab. I thought that was really cool. I had one student, this is for a different course, who created a game to help people understand kind of the security controls in their life. I've had students submit YouTube videos. I had one student submit a YouTube video where his like delivery was so good. He was talking to the camera like this, and then he cuts to another camera, and I'm like, oh yeah, here comes the sponsorship read. Here comes the ad read. He didn't do an ad read. He did a disclosure around like, I am not liable for this. Like, I teach you hacking for good, never for evil. That was really cool. I've had some students who've gone on to like do conference presentations based on their submissions to my course. So I got to say, I'm really impressed with all of my students. The only reason I couldn't do that is the last year I did it, I got a ton of very obviously AI generated submissions. And while I I am of the opinion that I think with education, like AI is here and you kind of have to figure out how to do it. It was really disappointing for me to read because I was sitting there thinking, so the student hasn't written this. I'm reading this. I'm going to give them feedback. This feedback is never going to be read by a human. At the most, it'll probably get written by the AI. The student cannot possibly learn anything from what feedback I give it because I'm giving the feedback to them, not the AI that wrote it. So I I had this situation where I was kind of like, well, I need to force them to at least try and write it themselves, which is why I eventually switched to making TikToks last year because TikToks, they're short. So the students can't just like give it to AI because AI generates too much text for them to read in 3 minutes. So they have to edit it. And then I said they couldn't use any AI generated voices as well. So they had to voice it themselves. So when it sounded really weird because AI generated text sounds weird, it would be like very obvious to their ears and they just naturally change it as they're writing. Plus, I mean, I don't think that, I think there's a value in saying more with less words. And a lot of students do not learn that skill at university. They learn the complete opposite skill, which is to say less with more words.
So like you have to have a 4 page or 10 page or 10,000 word. Yeah, that I think that ship has sailed because, like you said, in the comparison with the TikTok videos of the next year, they were a lot more concise because they had to be. You have to be within the age of AI. You really have to be a good editor.
Yeah.
Like I do this a lot at work when I give presentations and stuff. I will start with AI to like groom my thoughts, and then I will spend hours going through like that is stupid. I wouldn't say that. Oh, this rearrange things. I'm guilty of starting with AI, and I think that the way you put it, I think that's why education, like teachers and staff, don't want the students using AI because one, they don't learn, and two, it's unnecessary work for you as the teacher trying to grade AI writing. It's like
It's just there's no
worthless.
point doing it. There's a
Yeah.
really good like quote from a book about education, and it says the purpose of a lecture is to deliver information from the lecturer's mouth to the student's ears without entering the brain of either. And nobody, like, even lectures, all right, no one's really thinking about lectures. So like even when you're producing them, you're kind of just speaking them out loud, like as if it was like on rote, right? You deliver the same lecture every year. So I think in a lot of ways, like education does have to change because in some ways the lecturers have kind of got off easy, like the professors, of being able to deliver the same material every year. Now with AI, they have to think about the material they're delivering and thinking, hey, like, how do I actually get the student to do this and not just use AI to generate it? Though I think there's a lot of cases where students are just lazy,
and
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 they
professors sometimes
and
too.
and I kind of don't really blame students for it either. A lot of my colleagues are very angry about students using AI, but honestly, can you blame them? Like, it makes it so much quicker to get words on a page. Like, of course they take that shortcut. I take that shortcut. You take that shortcut, especially if there's a big deadline. We'd all take that shortcut. So a lot of the kind of assignments for me is like, how do I, one, make this something the student actually wants to complete, and two, make them really think about what they're doing.
I think you pointed out a really good piece of that where are trying to make your lectures, for lack of a better word, entertaining. Like your education style is to entertain and give a large breadth of information that are each like individual nuggets of things that they might grasp onto, kind of like you did at that Uber challenge. You were like, "Oh, this is fun," and you're hoping to spark that in each of them. I'm curious, uh, is that in your mind the future of education, like more entertaining and more like I guess broad so that the student can go find joy in something and deeper dive on it?
I think so. I there's always going to be stuff that we're not super passionate about learning, but that we understand we have to learn as part of something, right? Look at every developer who's forced to learn about security, right? None of them want to learn about security. They're all forced to. But there are always going to be stuff that we kind of just have to do. Like it's not specifically targeted towards, like, it's just we just have to get this done. And I think we as like professionals kind of understand that. I think students don't have that professional experience yet to understand it. So there's always going to be stuff they do that they're not going to like. But I do think the future of education is perhaps not around entertaining students, but about figuring out how to change the relationship between teacher and student for it to mentee and mentor. Like, my job is to know the students, know what they're interested in, and give them like stuff that would help their learning. So if they tell me, oh, I really liked forensics, can you recommend anything? My job is to know a bunch of forensic resources. And I think the future of education becomes one of a relationship between teacher and student. Horrible to scale. You cannot scale it at all. Believe you me, I teach like 300 students. I barely know everybody's names, but I do know at least a little bit about what interests them, especially if they come and talk to me after the lecture and they ask for more support. I do know them. And there are students now who have graduated that I still speak to, and just give them like advice if they want it, but just to see how they're getting on and how their career is progressing. So I think the future of education is one of like relationship building. And especially with AI now, you can get AI to do everything for you, but AI fundamentally cannot be a friend. It can pretend to be a friend, but it cannot truly be a friend. It cannot truly challenge you in certain ways. And I'll use a real example of this. So I was teaching, and I had a student, very good student, very like technical, used to work in networking, has gone back to do a degree in cybersecurity, mature student. And one week he came into class and he was bragging about how little time he'd spent on his assignment. For another class, he was like, oh, I did my programming assignment, it was easy, I did it at like 2 a.m, I did it in an hour. And I was like, okay, great. I would probably spend more time than that if I were you. Anyway, the next week he comes back and he's like, Katie, how do I make a complaint against a lecturer? And I was like, what's up? Like, what's happened? He's like, I got a bad grade in my programming. And I said to him, and no joke, this is exactly what I said, weren't you here last week bragging about how little time you spent on your programming? Do you think that could be related? And the poor guy, I just destroyed him in front of all of his friends. But he needed that kind of challenge, right? Like, he needed somebody to kind of pull him back a peg and like say, look, like, this is obviously of your own making. Some students need the complete opposite. Some students have come up to me and said, I don't know if I should be studying this degree. I don't know if I'm good enough to be in cybersecurity. I don't know if I'm technical enough. I don't know if I can learn this. And I said, don't worry, we're going to break it down. We'll get you through this course. Don't worry. But what does interest you in cybersecurity? Like, what is the most interest? And for them, it's finding that path forward for them. It's being that kind of guide and lifting them up. So I think with AI, you really can't have those two. You're only going to ever get lifted up, right? But you also need people to challenge you and be like, maybe you should spend more than 2 hours on your homework and you'd probably get a better grade, wouldn't you?
I am very much looking forward to the future of Katie Paxton Fear style education. I have a 4-year-old who is pretty smart. He can count to 100 in Spanish and do most of his math between like 0 and like 20 or 30, and like knows how to spell a bunch of words. And he used to go to this school last year that was like, let's talk about the color red today. I'm like, oh my. But now he goes to a school that is more focused on mentee, mentor style learning, where they like, have to do their own stuff. They got to get their book bag, they got to wash their hands, they got to pick up their toys and do all this stuff. And it's more of a independence, I think. And I think the sooner we get people to that state of independence, the better off they'll be in the long run. Like, no matter how much you want to like cover and tend to them, it's not for their best interests usually.
And sometimes recognizing like what they need as well, like what they need from that relationship. Do they need somebody to be there and to give them lists of books to read, right? Or do they need somebody to come to them and like tell them everything's going to be okay and you're doing great, like do not worry, you will get through this, because every student needs something different, and that's how you build like genuine relationships with students. You get to know them as people.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find a relationship with you online?
You are very welcome to form a parasocial relationship with me by following me. No, I make YouTube videos inside a PhD. You can just Google my name as well. I'm very proud of that one. I'm Googleable now, and find all of my stuff. I speak a lot at conferences. I do a lot of online virtual stuff as well. And I do a lot of like just free content available out there on the internet. If you want to see me in a potentially like a more chaotic manner, you can follow me on Twitter, where I post political rants as well as cybersecurity rants. So if you want that kind of quality content on your feed, you're welcome to follow me.
It
And
all
then you
kind of
can,
flows together now.
yeah.
Cyber, politics, it's all one thing now.
Well, that's why I try and tell my students as well. I'm like, half of my job is to make them realize that cybersecurity is bigger than just hack people, uh, and like how seeing how their like small little world of cybersecurity interacts with like greater society as a whole.
Yeah, so find Katie on Twitter and LinkedIn and all the other social platforms. You're very vocal, and I'm following and very much enjoying the content. So give Katie a follow.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for the lovely conversation.